Do you really think I would believe some Macumber from a slum kid? The voice, sharp and brittle as shattered glass, cut through the opulent silence of the grand mansion. It belonged to Victoria Whitmore, a woman entombed in a wheelchair, her face a mask of bitter discontent. Her steel blue eyes, cold and unforgiving as a winter sky, were fixed on the 12-year-old boy standing at the service entrance, a place she reserved for those she considered less than human. Daniel Thompson had just made the boldest, most audacious proposal of his young life. For 3 consecutive days, from the cramped, stuffy window of the small apartment he shared with his grandmother across the street, he had watched this woman. He had watched her servants present her with exquisite meals on fine china, meals fit for royalty, and he had watched, with a growing ache in his own empty stomach, as she would take a few disdainful bites before dismissing the plates, still laden with food, to be thrown away. Entire plates of roasted chicken, of fresh salmon, of vibrant, colorful vegetables, all destined for the trash, while he and his grandmother, Ruth, made a thin soup from potato peels and scavenged herbs last for 2 days. Today, fueled by a mixture of gnawing hunger and a strange, burgeoning sense of purpose, he had finally gathered the courage to knock on that imposing, polished back door. "Ma'am, I wasn't joking," Daniel replied, his voice a marvel of control. It was a calm, quiet sound that surprised even himself. A small, steady flame in the cold wind of her contempt. "I can help you walk again. I just need you to give me the food you're throwing away." Victoria Whitmore let out a laugh. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a cruel, ugly bark of derision that echoed through the marble-floored hall, a sound designed to wound, to diminish. "Listen here, little boy," she sneered, maneuvering her expensive wheelchair closer to the door, her movements sharp and aggressive. "I have spent $15 million on the best doctors in the world for the last 8 years. Neurosurgeons from Johns Hopkins, specialists from Switzerland, healers from the Orient. You really think a little street urchin like you, who probably can't even read, is going to succeed where the greatest medical minds on the planet have failed?" What Victoria Whitmore, in her fortress of wealth and prejudice, didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that Daniel Thompson wasn't just any kid. While she looked at him and saw only the color of his skin, the worn fabric of his clothes, the poverty she so deeply despised, he was looking at her. But he was truly seeing her. His eyes, trained by years of caring for his diabetic grandmother, years of learning to read the subtle, silent language of the human body, were picking up signs that her $15 million team of experts had either missed or chosen to ignore. "You take your medicine for back pain every day at 2 in the afternoon, Daniel said, his voice still calm, his gaze steady. He watched as her expression of pure mockery began to curdle, to shift into something else. Surprise, confusion. 3 white pills and 1 blue one. You take them with a small glass of water, no ice." He paused, letting the details land. "And you always complain that your legs feel cold, even when it's hot outside. You have your maid wrap them in a cashmere blanket, but it doesn't help." How do you know that?" Victoria whispered, her arrogance wavering for the first time in 8 long years. The sneer on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, fear. Daniel had spent weeks observing her. From his window with a pair of old scratched binoculars his grandfather had left him, he had watched her daily routine. It was not born of morbid curiosity but of a deep instinctual recognition. He had seen these symptoms before. He had seen them in his own grandmother, just before the traditional herbal remedies and the specific, targeted massages had saved her from a doctor's grim prognosis. The difference was that his grandmother had relied on a deep, ancestral wisdom, a knowledge passed down from generation to generation, while Victoria Whitmore clung only to the sterile, impersonal solutions that her vast fortune could buy. "Because I see what your expensive doctors don't want to see," Daniel replied, his tone still respectful, despite the venom she had directed at him. "You don't need more medicine, ma'am. You don't need another surgery. You need someone who understands that sometimes the deepest healing doesn't come from where we expect it to." Victoria, recovering her composure, her fear quickly transmuting back into anger, slammed the heavy door shut, but not before Daniel saw it. He saw the look in her eyes, the look that confirmed everything he suspected. It was no longer just contempt. It was the raw, primal fear of a person who has just been truly seen, whose most carefully guarded secret has been exposed by the most unlikely of sources. It was the fear of a queen whose nakedness has just been pointed out by a pauper. As he walked back across the manicured street, away from the cold, imposing mansion and towards the small, crumbling apartment building he called home, Daniel allowed himself a small, discreet smile. Victoria Whitmore had just made her first, fatal mistake. She had completely, utterly underestimated someone who had grown up learning that survival, true survival, required observation, patience, and a wisdom that money could never ever buy. What that bitter, wealthy, imprisoned woman had no idea of was that this slum kid carried within him the accumulated knowledge of 4 generations of healers, and, more importantly, in those few moments at her back door, he had just diagnosed not only the root of her physical ailment, but the deeper, more malignant sickness in her soul. 3 days had passed since Victoria had slammed the door in the boy's face, but she couldn't shake the profound sense of unease that had settled over her like a shroud. The boy's words, his unnerving accuracy, echoed in the silent, cavernous rooms of her mansion. 3 white pills and 1 blue one. Your legs feel cold, even in the heat. How could he possibly have known? The staff was paid handsomely for their discretion. Her medical routines were a closely guarded secret. Had he been spying on her? The thought was both infuriating and terrifying. The next morning, Victoria, a woman accustomed to having the world bend to her will, decided it was time to turn the tables. It was time to find out exactly who this cheeky, impertinent child was. A single, sharp phone call to her personal assistant, a man whose entire career was dedicated to solving problems for the wealthy, was all it took. The report arrived on her tablet within the hour, a concise, digital summary of a small, insignificant life. Daniel Thompson, age 12, lived with his grandmother, Ruth Thompson, age 73, in the Riverside Gardens public housing complex, a collection of drab low-rise buildings on the other side of the park. Father, unknown. Mother, deceased, killed in a car accident when the boy was 5, currently attending Northwood Preparatory Academy on a full academic scholarship, grades excellent, criminal record, none. Asterisk, typical, Victoria muttered to herself, her thumb swiping dismissively through the report. Just another sob story. Another case of a poor little thing trying to take advantage of the kindness of strangers. A grit in training, but there was something in the report, a small, anomalous detail, that bothered her, that snagged on the edges of her carefully constructed certainty. It was in the file on the grandmother, Ruth Thompson, former hospital employee, a nursing assistant, retired due to disability after a severe, debilitating case of type 2 diabetes. Standard enough. But then there was the addendum. Medical records showed an inexplicable recovery over the past 2 years. A dramatic improvement in her condition that her doctors had officially classified as unexpected and clinically undocumented. Victoria dismissed the information as a bureaucratic error, a glitch in the system. After all, what real knowledge could an old black woman from a public hospital possibly possess? It was probably just a misdiagnosis in the first place. Quackery and incompetence were the hallmarks of public medicine, as far as she was concerned. Meanwhile, across the street, in a small, clean apartment that smelled of lavender and chamomile, Daniel was carefully preparing his next approach. Victoria's reaction, the fear he had seen in her eyes before she had slammed the door, had confirmed his initial suspicions. She wasn't really paralyzed, at least, not in the way that everyone, including herself, believed. Grandma, Daniel said, sitting down at the small worn kitchen table where Ruth was carefully sorting a collection of dried herbs. I need you to tell me again about the signs of pseudo-paralysis. Ruth Thompson, at 73, had a face that was a beautiful, intricate map of a life lived with grace, sorrow, and immense strength. She had worked for 40 years as a nursing assistant in the city's largest public hospital, but her real, profound knowledge of healing came from a much older, much deeper lineage. Her great-grandmother had been a midwife and a healer in the Mississippi Delta, a woman who understood the secrets of the earth, the language of plants, the intricate, invisible connections between the body and the soul. It was a knowledge that had been passed down, from mother to daughter, through generations of hardship and resilience. When the hospital's top endocrinologists had told Ruth that she had 6 months to live due to complications from her diabetes, that her organs were shutting down, that there was nothing more they could do, it was this ancestral wisdom, this deep, intuitive understanding of the body's own power to heal, that had saved her life. Ah, so you saw it, Ruth smiled, her experienced, intelligent eyes shining with pride. She looked at her grandson, this serious, thoughtful boy who carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders, and she saw the continuation of their line. You saw what I taught you to look for, didn't you? Daniel nodded, his expression intent. Her legs, they tense up when she doesn't realize she's being watched. The muscles, they respond to emotional stimuli. When she was yelling at the gardener yesterday, I saw her left foot twitch. Just for a second. Good boy, Ruth murmured, her gnarled fingers continuing their work. What else? During my observations, Daniel continued, his voice low as if he were a detective presenting as evidence, I've noticed a pattern. Her feet move unconsciously when she's angry, when she yells at the staff. Her leg muscles clench when something upsets her deeply. They're almost imperceptible signs, but to someone who has been trained to look for what the doctors with their machines don't see, they are clear as day. She's trapped, Daniel murmured, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together in his mind. She's trapped in her own mind. Her body works, but her mind has forged the chains. Exactly, Ruth said, her voice a soft, sad whisper. Psychological trauma manifesting as a physical paralysis. A prison of her own making. I've seen 3 cases just like it at the hospital over the years. Rich doctors, they don't want to treat the mind. They don't know how. It's easier to prescribe a pill, to order another expensive scan, than it is to heal a wounded soul. That afternoon, Victoria received an unexpected and unwelcome visitor. Dr. Hartwell, a private neurologist, a man with an expensive suit, and an even more expensive bedside manner, arrived with the results of a new battery of tests she had demanded the week before. In a desperate, ongoing search for any sliver of hope, any new experimental treatment that might offer a cure, Victoria, need to be honest with you, the doctor said, adjusting his designer glasses, his expression a carefully calibrated mixture of professional concern and personal discomfort. These new tests, they show something quite peculiar. There is significant neural activity in areas of your spinal cord that should be, for all intents and purposes, completely inactive. It's as if your nervous system is functioning perfectly. What does that mean? Victoria asked, her voice sharp, tense. It means, Dr. Hartwell said, choosing his words with extreme care, that, neurologically speaking, there is no discernible physical reason for your paralysis. I've suspected this for some time, Victoria, but now, with this new data, I am almost certain. He hesitated, clearly dreading what he was about to say next. Have you considered more intensive psychological therapy? Sometimes, trauma can manifest itself physically in ways that stop. Victoria shouted, her voice a raw, wounded cry. Are you saying this is all in my head? Are you saying I'm faking it? That I've spent 8 years in this goddamn chair for fun? No, of course not. That's not it at all, the doctor stammered, backtracking hastily. Your paralysis is very real. The symptoms are real, but the cause may be psychosomatic. With the right treatment, with the right therapy. Victoria dismissed him with a sharp, angry wave of her hand before he could finish his sentence. The truth, when it finally arrived, hurt more than any terminal diagnosis ever could. If her paralysis was mental, if it was a product of her own mind, then that meant she had wasted 8 years of her life. She had hidden from the world, from herself, behind a self-imposed, self-created disability, and worse, much, much worse, it meant that a poor, 12-year-old boy from across the street had diagnosed her condition in a matter of minutes, a truth that she had spent 8 years and $15 million denying. That night, Victoria found herself staring out of her massive bedroom window, her gaze fixed on the modest, brightly lit apartment where Daniel and his grandmother lived. She could see their shadows moving behind the cheap, thin curtains, a family living on an income that wouldn't even cover her monthly medication bill, but who apparently possessed a knowledge, a wisdom, that all her money, all her power, could not buy. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, Victoria felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Humility, and then, just as quickly, she choked it down, smothering it with a renewed, familiar, and comforting wave of anger. That boy is not going to humiliate me, she whispered to the cold, empty room, her voice a low, venomous hiss. I will not let a slum dweller, a nobody, make a fool of me. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that at that very moment, Daniel was sitting at his own small kitchen table with his grandmother, carefully, methodically, planning his next move. He had, with his preternatural insight, recognized the type of woman Victoria was. She was too proud to accept help, especially from someone she considered her inferior. She was too rich to value a wisdom that was offered for free, and she was too deeply, profoundly hurt to trust anyone. But Daniel Thompson had learned a valuable and powerful lesson from his grandmother, a lesson passed down through generations of healers who had survived against impossible odds. Sometimes, to heal a person, you first have to show them exactly how sick they really are. And so, while Victoria Whitmore, in her gilded cage, plotted her revenge against the boy who had dared to expose her most intimate, most shameful lie, Daniel smiled a quiet, sad smile. He knew that true power, the power to heal, the power to change, always belongs to those who understand that healing never comes from where we expect it, especially when it comes from the hands of those the world has taught us to despise. The following week brought a radical and ugly change in the dynamic between the opulent mansion and the humble apartment. Victoria, having decided that she would not tolerate being disrespected, being seen by a smug little brat, began a silent, vicious campaign to humiliate and crush the boy. First, she made a call to Northwood Preparatory Academy, the prestigious private school where Daniel was a full scholarship student. Principal Patterson, she had said, her voice a silken, dangerous purr. This is Victoria Whitmore, of the Whitmore Foundation. The name of the foundation, one of the school's largest benefactors, was a carefully deployed weapon. I'm calling because I'd like to discuss the inappropriate behavior of one of your scholarship students, a Daniel Thompson. He has been trespassing on private property in my neighborhood and harassing the residents. The call worked with a swift and brutal efficiency. The very next day, Daniel was summoned to the principal's office. He stood on the thick plush carpet, his worn sneakers looking shabby and out of place, as Principal Patterson, a man whose spine seemed to be made of jelly, delivered the veiled but unmistakable threat. Daniel was to stay in his place. He was not to bother the school's generous benefactors. One more misstep, one more complaint, and the scholarship that represented his only path to a different, better future would be revoked. Victoria did not stop there. She also contacted the superintendent of the Riverside Gardens housing complex, the man who held the power of eviction over Daniel and his grandmother. She spoke of disruptive elements in the building, of undesirable tenants who were causing discomfort to the more respectable neighbors, although he couldn't legally evict them without cause. The superintendent, eager to please a woman as powerful as Victoria Whitmore, began to make their lives a living hell. There were sudden, intrusive inspections that always seemed to find minor, imaginary problems. There were complaints about non-existent noise. There were threats of fines for infractions that had never occurred. She's trying to get us kicked out of the neighborhood, Daniel said to his grandmother one evening, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and fear. They were sitting on their small, cramped porch, drinking the herbal tea that Ruth prepared every night, a calming blend of chamomile and mint. She wants us to disappear, so she doesn't have to face the truth about herself. Ruth Thompson watched her grandson, her wise, experienced eyes full of a deep, sad understanding. At 73, she had survived decades of this. Decades of institutional racism, of discrimination at work, of quiet, insidious attempts to silence her, to diminish her. She recognized the patterns of behavior of those who used power and privilege as weapons to protect their own fragile egos. "Boy, that woman is afraid," Ruth said calmly, her voice a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. "When rich people get afraid of poor people, it's because they know, deep down, that they've done something wrong. And when they're afraid of the truth, they'll do anything at all, to destroy the person who can reveal it." "But, Grandma, what if she succeeds?" Daniel asked, the fear in his voice now palpable. "What if she gets my scholarship taken away? What if she gets us kicked out of here? We'll have nowhere to go." Ruth smiled, a slow, wise smile that seemed to hold the strength of generations. "Daniel," she said, her voice taking on a new, deeper tone, the tone of a teacher, a storyteller. "Let me tell you a story. When your mother was just about your age, there was a white doctor at the hospital where I worked, a powerful man. He tried to get me fired because I knew too much, because I was helping patients with my remedies, treatments he didn't know and couldn't understand. He used all his influence, all his power, to try and hurt me." "What happened?" Daniel asked, leaning forward, his own troubles momentarily forgotten. "I did what our family has always done," Ruth said, her eyes distant, remembering. "I observed, I learned, I documented everything, and when the time was right, I used his own arrogance against him." "Do you want to know how?" Daniel nodded, his eyes wide, realizing that his grandmother was about to teach him something fundamental, something far more important than any lesson he could learn at his fancy prep school. "That doctor," Ruth continued, "he had a very important patient, a wealthy businessman, a man who donated a lot of money to the hospital, and this businessman was suffering from the very same condition that I had already cured in dozens of poor people the doctor had dismissed as hopeless cases. When all of his expensive, modern treatments failed, when the patient was on his deathbed, Guess who they finally came to see, in secret, in the middle of the night? You, Daniel breathed. Exactly. And when I saved that man's life, using the very same methods that the arrogant, powerful doctor had dismissed as primitive and unscientific, everyone, from the hospital board to the man's wealthy family, knew who really understood medicine. That doctor, he lost his position, he lost his reputation, he lost everything, not because I sought revenge, but because the truth, my boy, the truth always, always, finds its way into the light. Daniel began to understand. A new, clearer picture was forming in his mind. Victoria, she isn't just afraid that I can help her, he said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. She's afraid that other people will find out that she rejected help from someone she considers inferior. She's afraid of being exposed as a fool. Now you're thinking like a real healer, Ruth smiled, her pride in him evident in her shining eyes. We don't just heal the body, boy, sometimes we have to heal the sick soul of an entire society. That night, armed with a new sense of purpose, a new strategy, Daniel began a meticulous deep-dive research into the life of Victoria Whitmore. Using the powerful computers at his school library, he went far beyond the superficial information from the private investigator's report. He dug into old newspaper archives, society pages, public records, and he discovered details that completely and chillingly changed his understanding of the situation. Victoria had not been born a Whitmore. She had been born Victoria Kowalski, the daughter of poor, struggling Polish immigrants. She had clawed her way up the social ladder, her beauty and her ambition, her only assets. She had married Harrison Whitmore III, the sole heir to a massive family fortune, a fortune that Daniel discovered, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, had been originally built on slave labor in the cotton plantations of the 19th century. The accident that had left her paralyzed, he discovered, had happened exactly one day after she had discovered, through a private investigator of her own, that her husband Harrison was planning to divorce her for a younger woman, and that the prenuptial agreement she had signed would leave her with almost nothing. Even more interesting, and more suspicious, was the fact that Harrison had died under mysterious circumstances just 2 years later, leaving his entire vast fortune to his beloved disabled wife, Victoria. The will, Daniel found, had been changed just 1 week before his death, while Harrison was hospitalized after a sudden, unexpected heart attack. And then, Daniel discovered something that made the hair on his arms stand on end, something that explained Victoria's particular, visceral hostility towards him, towards his family. The Thompson family, his family, had worked for the Whitmore family for generations. His great-great-grandfather had been a slave on the original Whitmore plantation. His great-grandmother had been a maid in the very mansion that Victoria now occupied. And his own grandmother, Ruth, he learned from a series of old hospital employment records, had been the private nurse who had cared for Harrison Whitmore's mother in the final stages of her battle with cancer. But the most revealing, most explosive detail of all was in a collection of old private medical records that Ruth, his grandmother, had kept hidden away in a locked box for decades. Harrison's mother, who the official records said had died of terminal cancer, had, in fact, been cured. She had made a miraculous complete recovery, using the traditional herbal treatments that Ruth had secretly administered to her. The family's expensive doctors, who had given up on her, had never known the truth. They had credited her miraculous recovery to the conventional and failing treatments they had been providing. Grandma, Daniel said the next morning, his voice trembling with the weight of his discoveries. Victoria isn't just physically sick, she's sick with guilt, and with fear, and with shame. Her body, it's just reflecting the prison that she's built for her own soul. Ruth nodded, her face grim but proud. And now, my grandson, she said, her voice a low, powerful whisper, you understand what true healing she really needs. It's not just about making her walk again. It's about making her face who she really is, and what she has done. Exactly, Daniel said, his own voice now firm, his fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. But remember, Ruth cautioned, her hand on his shoulder, our family has never used our gifts to hurt. We use them to heal, always, even when the person doesn't deserve it, even when she hates us for it. Daniel spent the rest of that week watching Victoria, but now with a new, profound understanding. Every cruel gesture she made, every new attempt to humiliate him and his grandmother, only confirmed his diagnosis. She wasn't paralyzed by physical damage. She was paralyzed by a guilt so deep, so toxic, that it had manifested as a real, physical paralysis. The plan that began to form in his mind was audacious. It was dangerous, and it was brilliant. It was no longer just about proving that he could heal her. It was about forcing her to confront the decades of privilege that had been built on the suffering of others, the lies she had told about her own identity, and the terrible dark crimes she had buried under a mountain of money. Victoria Whitmore thought she was fighting a poor, insignificant boy who wanted her leftover food. She had no idea that she was about to face 4 generations of accumulated wisdom, a lineage of healers who had survived centuries of oppression, and a young man who now carried not only the knowledge to cure her body, but the evidence to completely and utterly destroy her life. While Victoria plotted her next public humiliation of Daniel, the boy smiled a quiet, sad smile. He knew that each new act of cruelty from her only confirmed that he had correctly diagnosed not only her physical condition, but the deep, moral rot that truly held her prisoner. The cure that Daniel was now planning would be much, much deeper than Victoria could ever imagine, and it would be much, much more painful. The final confrontation took place on a Sunday morning, a time when Victoria Whitmore least expected it, a time she usually reserved for solitary, bitter reflection. Daniel did not go to the back door, the service entrance reserved for people like him. He walked up the wide, sweeping stone steps to the massive, ornate front door of the mansion and rang the bell. When Victoria, with a sigh of irritation, remotely opened the door from her wheelchair, she found not only Daniel standing on her doorstep, but also his grandmother, Ruth Thompson, and with them was a third person, a person whose presence made the blood in Victoria's veins run cold. It was Dr. Patricia Williams, the neurologist who had secretly, and at great expense, treated Harrison Whitmore's mother all those years ago. "Good morning, Victoria," Daniel said, his voice calm and clear, carrying an authority that was utterly at odds with his age and size. "I've come to keep my promise. Today is the day you're going to walk again." Victoria, her face a mask of rage and disbelief, tried to slam the door shut, but her own arrogance, her own shock, betrayed her. "What kind of sick joke is this?" she spat. "I've already called security. They'll be here any second. Go ahead." Daniel smiled, a cool, knowing smile. "I'm sure they'll want to see this, too. Especially when they find out who you really are." Ruth Thompson stepped forward, her posture radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity. She was carrying an old, worn leather briefcase. "Victoria Kowalski," she said, her voice a low, powerful murmur, daughter of Polish immigrants. Born July 19th, 1975. Married Harrison Whitmore in 2005. Just 3 months after discovering he was cheating on you and planning to leave you with nothing. Victoria's face went completely, deathly pale. No one had used her real name in decades. No one was supposed to know. "The accident that left you paralyzed," Daniel continued, his voice relentless, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall that was now closing in around her, "happened exactly 1 day after you discovered Harrison was planning to file for divorce. Very convenient, don't you think?" Dr. Williams, her own face pale with a mixture of fear and a strange, new resolve, opened a medical file she was carrying. "I treated Harrison's mother when she was dying of cancer," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Ruth here was the one who actually cured her with her traditional remedies, but the family never knew. I kept all the records, including the neurological tests I performed on you, Victoria, after your so-called accident." She looked up, her eyes meeting Victoria's. "Your tests always showed normal neural activity, perfectly normal. But you paid me very well to keep that a secret, didn't you? $5 million, to be exact, to confirm a non-existent, permanent paralysis." Victoria staggered back, her wheelchair bumping against the ornate marble table in the grand foyer. "You can't prove anything," she whispered, her voice a hoarse, desperate croak. Daniel smiled and took a small digital recorder out of his pocket. "Oh, but I can," he said. "You know that new, state-of-the-art security and monitoring system you had installed last year to keep an eye on your employees? It worked very well for recording your private phone conversations, too." He pressed a button, and Victoria's own voice, sharp and clear, filled the silent, cavernous hall. "Dr. Williams, I need you to stick with the diagnosis. If Harrison finds out I can walk, I'll lose everything in the divorce. Keep confirming the paralysis, and I'll double your fee." You recorded my private calls," Victoria shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of victimhood finally, irrevocably slipping. "Not just the calls," Ruth said calmly, her voice a steady, unwavering anchor in the storm. "Daniel also documented how you can walk perfectly well when you think no one is watching. 43 separate video clips over the last 6 months, showing you walking around the house, even dancing, when you believed you were completely and safely alone. Daniel connected his phone to a small, portable speaker, and the videos began to play. There was Victoria, getting up from her wheelchair with a fluid, easy grace to reach a book on a high shelf. There she was, walking normally, briskly, through her private garden in the early hours of the morning, and there she was, most damning of all, running on the treadmill in her private, soundproofed gym in the basement of the mansion. "Stop it," Victoria yelled, but her own voice on the videos betrayed her, chattering away normally to her staff when she thought there were no witnesses, complaining about the stock market, gossiping about her neighbors. "There's more," Daniel said, softly, his voice now full of a quiet, sad gravity. "Harrison's medical records, from his final hospitalization. You altered his will while he was sedated, after his heart attack, and the same Dr. Williams who confirmed your fake paralysis. Also, under duress, falsified your husband's death certificate." Dr. Williams hung her head, her shoulders shaking. "She blackmailed me," she whispered, her voice thick with shame. "She said she would reveal that I had covered up her fake paralysis, that she would ruin my career, if I didn't confirm that Harrison had died of natural causes." "Harrison was poisoned," Ruth said, her voice now ringing with the absolute, unshakable authority of someone who had seen death in 1,000 forms, and knew its many disguises. "Digitalis extracted from the foxglove plant. It kills slowly, it perfectly simulates a heart attack, and it's almost impossible to detect in an autopsy after a few days." Victoria collapsed in her wheelchair, a broken, defeated woman, realizing that her entire world, her entire life of lies, was completely, utterly, crumbling around her. "You don't understand," she sobbed, her voice a pathetic, desperate wail. "He was going to leave me with nothing. I gave the best years of my life to that man. And now," Daniel said, his voice quiet but firm, "the time has come for the real cure. Get up, Victoria. We all know you can." "I can't," she shrieked, clinging to the lie, to the prison she had built for herself, even now, at the very end. "Get up," Daniel shouted, his voice suddenly, shockingly, full of an authority so powerful, so absolute, that it made Victoria jump. She scrambled involuntarily out of her chair, standing up on her own 2 feet out of pure, reflexive shock. For a long, silent moment, everyone stood staring at the woman who had pretended to be disabled for 8 long years, now standing, trembling, with a mixture of pure animal rage and a deep soul-crushing fear. "Congratulations," Daniel said calmly, his voice returning to its usual quiet tone. "You're cured, officially." Ruth stepped forward, holding out a new set of documents. From her briefcase, "These," she said, her voice cold and clear, "are the reports that will be delivered today, to the police, to the FBI, and to the IRS. Insurance fraud, falsification of medical reports, tax evasion, and, of course, first-degree murder. We also sent a copy of everything to the Washington Post," Daniel added, his voice soft but devastating, "and to CNN, and to every major social media news outlet. The story of the fake millionaire paralytic who murdered her husband will be national news by tomorrow morning." Victoria looked around desperately, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for an escape, for a way out. But there was nowhere to run. There was no way to deny what had been recorded, documented, and proven beyond any shadow of a doubt. Decades of a life built on a foundation of lies, of theft, of blood, were crumbling into dust in a matter of minutes. "You know what's most ironic, Victoria?" Daniel asked, as he helped his grandmother put the incriminating documents back into her briefcase. "You're really going to be paralyzed now, in a federal prison, without your millions, without your paid-off doctors, without anyone to prop up your lies." In the distance, the sound of approaching sirens began to grow louder. Someone, a curious neighbor perhaps, disturbed by all the commotion, had called the authorities. "The real paralysis," Ruth said, her voice full of a deep, sad wisdom, "has always been in your soul, Victoria. You paralyzed yourself morally, so long ago, that you forgot how to live with dignity. You forgot how to be human." As the police cars pulled up to the front of the mansion, their blue and red lights flashing against the pristine white columns, Victoria looked at Daniel, her eyes a maelstrom of hatred, of fear, and of a strange, new, involuntary respect. "How," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken sound, "how did a 12-year-old boy manage to destroy my entire life?" Daniel smiled, a quiet, sad smile, the smile of someone who had learned, far too young, that justice sometimes requires patience, observation, and the immense courage to stand up to those who consider you inferior. "Very simple. he replied. You completely and fatally underestimated someone who grew up knowing that survival requires intelligence, not privilege. And you forgot, he added, his voice a soft, final whisper, that sometimes the most powerful remedies, the truest healing, come from the places we least expect them. In the center of that grand marble hall where arrogance disguised as victimization had once reigned supreme, a new stark reality was now taking shape, like a symphony that finally, after years of dissonant, ugly notes, finds its true, harmonious chord, proving that justice, real justice, knows no color, no social class, and no limitations imposed by those who foolishly, fatally, confuse money with impunity. 6 months after Victoria Whitmore's spectacular, public collapse, the transformation was more dramatic, more complete, than any Hollywood screenwriter could have ever imagined. The mansion, the cold, opulent symbol of a privilege built on lies and corruption, now housed the Ruth Thompson Community Center for Holistic Healing, funded entirely by Victoria's assets, which had been confiscated by the FBI and, in a landmark legal ruling awarded to a trust managed by a community board, Daniel, now 14, had become the youngest student in the history of Harvard University to be admitted on a full academic scholarship, where he was enrolled in a special pre-med program. But what made his grandmother, Ruth, most proud was that her grandson had politely but firmly turned down dozens of million-dollar offers for book deals and movie rights, preferring to spend his time continuing to learn the secrets of the generations of healers who had come before him. Victoria, the woman who had once discarded expensive gourmet dishes while children went hungry just across the street, now shared a 2x4-meter cell in the federal penitentiary. Her 25-year sentence for first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and a host of other crimes would give her plenty of time to reflect on how she had wasted a lifetime building a fortress of power on a foundation of sand. The trial had become a worldwide phenomenon, the story of the millionaire fake paralytic, the woman who had fooled the entire medical system and had murdered her husband for his fortune, became a national symbol of the corrupting influence of wealth and the blindness of prejudice. But what had truly captured the public's imagination was the stark, stunning contrast between the quiet, profound wisdom of a 12-year-old boy from the projects and the deep, willful ignorance of a woman who had spent $15 million searching the world for a cure that had existed all along, right next door. Dr. Patricia Williams, the neurologist who had been blackmailed by Victoria, now worked, voluntarily, at the new community center. Daniel showed me that I had spent 40 years of my life looking only at machines, at scans, at test results. She confessed in a candid, widely publicized national interview. I had completely forgotten that real medicine, true healing, begins with listening to, and truly seeing, the whole patient. That boy taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 4 decades of expensive, specialized education. Dr. Hartwell, the other doctor who had accepted payments to confirm Victoria's false diagnosis, had lost his medical license and now worked as a clerk in a pharmacy. It was a perfect and poignant irony for a man who had so arrogantly scorned what he called unscientific treatments, while actively participating in a multi-million-dollar medical scam. The Riverside Gardens community, once a place of quiet, desperation and overlooked potential, had been completely transformed. Children who had once struggled just to eat now dreamed of becoming doctors, scientists, lawyers. Daniel, their hometown hero, had proven to them and to the world that intelligence and courage and determination could defeat any system, no matter how powerful, that was designed to keep them in their place. Victoria, in a final, cruel twist of fate, did indeed develop serious problems with her legs in prison. The long-term effects of stress, of depression, and of her own deep psychosomatic illness caused a genuine, irreversible muscle atrophy. Now, she truly depended on a wheelchair, a cheap standard-issue model borrowed from the prison infirmary, a chair that made her old, $15,000 custom model look like a lost, forgotten throne. Daniel visited her in prison, only once. She looked at him through the thick, bulletproof glass, her eyes empty, the old, familiar fire of her arrogance long since extinguished. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice a flat, lifeless monotone. "To make sure you understood," Daniel replied, his own voice quiet, devoid of any triumph. "I never wanted to destroy you, Victoria. I just wanted you to stop trying to destroy us. You were just a child," she whispered, the words a statement of profound and final disbelief. "And you were a wealthy, powerful adult, with all the resources in the world at your disposal," he replied, who, really, should have known the difference between right and wrong. Victoria finally, truly, understood the full, crushing magnitude of her own smallness. A 12-year-old boy had shown more wisdom, more integrity, more basic human decency than she had managed to display in her entire, long, privileged life. Daniel's story became a case study in universities across the country. The Daniel Thompson effect, as it came to be known, forced institutions, from medical schools to business schools, to recognize that exceptional intelligence, that true genius, comes from everywhere, especially from the places we have been conditioned to least expect it. New programs were created, new scholarships funded, all designed to identify and nurture talent in the communities that had been, for so long, traditionally ignored by academia. Ruth continues to run the community center, which has now expanded to occupy all 3 floors of the former Whitmore mansion. She trains a new generation of healers, young people who are learning to combine the ancient, ancestral wisdom of their forebears with the latest advances in modern science, proving that true, holistic wisdom knows no racial and no social barriers. Victoria, in her prison cell, became an example in criminology classes, a case study in how privilege without character, without empathy, without a soul, inevitably leads to self-destruction. When new prisoners ask how a woman who was once so rich, so powerful, ended up there, the answer is always the same. She underestimated someone she considered her inferior, and she paid the ultimate price for her arrogance. The real lesson of the story, the one that resonated around the world, was not about a poor boy who defeated a cruel rich woman. It was about how our society, all too often, ignores wisdom, and talent, and genius, when it comes from people who don't fit our narrow, prejudiced preconceptions about who is supposed to be smart, or worthy of our respect. Daniel proved that the most powerful healing is not for the body. It is for the toxic, sick beliefs that prevent us from recognizing the infinite, priceless value in every single human being, regardless of their color, their origin, or their socio-economic status. Victoria had tried to destroy Daniel, but in the end, she had only succeeded in destroying herself, and Daniel, in his quest to heal a single, broken woman, had learned that true healing isn't just about restoring broken bodies. It's about transforming minds that have been closed by prejudice into hearts that are open to recognizing greatness, wherever, and in whomever, it truly exists.